There is a quiet kind of crisis that does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with a dramatic event, a clear loss, or an obvious reason. It creeps in slowly, like a tide that rises while attention is elsewhere. One day, the life that was carefully constructed, the career, the relationships, the identity, the beliefs, starts to feel like a costume that no longer fits. The person wearing it knows every stitch, but cannot pretend it belongs to them anymore. And the mind, trying to make sense of this, lands on the most available explanation. Something is wrong with me. I am lost. But what if lost is not a destination? What if it is a doorway? What if the disorientation, the confusion, the inability to recognize the old self in the mirror is not the story of a life falling apart, but the very first chapter of a life becoming more honest? Feeling lost is one of the most misunderstood human experiences, not because it is rare, but because it is almost universally framed as failure, as weakness, as a sign that something fundamental has broken down. In reality, for many people, feeling lost is the first signal that psychological growth has become real. Not theoretical, not aspirational. Real. The brain works like a prediction machine. It is constantly building, updating, and relying on internal maps. Mental models of how the world works, who people are, what love looks like, what success means, what a person like me is supposed to do and feel and want. These maps are not randomly assembled. They are built carefully, over years, from childhood stories, cultural rules, family patterns, religious frameworks, personal experiences, and a vast number of beliefs that were absorbed before there was ever the capacity to question them. When reality fits the map, life feels relatively coherent. Not necessarily perfect, not necessarily painless, but navigable. There is a background sense of, I understand roughly what this is, and I know roughly what to do with it. The crisis begins when reality refuses to fit. A relationship that matches the script of this is what love is supposed to look like begins to feel suffocating or empty or fundamentally wrong. A career that earns respect, stability, and external admiration starts to feel like a slow erosion of something essential. A set of beliefs that once provided structure and comfort begins to produce more internal conflict than peace. A version of self that was built to survive a particular environment stops working in the new terrain life has moved into. New experiences arrive. New emotional truths surface. New knowledge challenges old assumptions. And the map does not know where to put any of it. It cannot integrate the new data without tearing. That tearing is what most people experience as being lost. It is not the absence of a path. It is the failure of the current map to see the path that actually fits the person who is now standing at the edge of it. There is a concept in psychology called positive disintegration. It was developed by Polish psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski, and it describes something that feels deeply counterintuitive, that some internal structures must fall apart before more complex, authentic, and resilient ones can form. The idea is that not all psychological discomfort is a sign of dysfunction. Some of it is a sign of development. A child's simple, unquestioned faith in authority figures must disintegrate before genuine critical thinking can emerge. A black and white moral framework, built for the safety of early life, must crack before real ethical nuance can develop. A rigid identity constructed around performance, perfectionism, or people-pleasing must break down before a more authentic sense of self can take its place. A borrowed life script, this is what someone in my family, my culture, my generation is supposed to do, must dissolve before a genuinely chosen life can begin. In every case, the disintegration feels like loss, because something is being lost. The structure that held things together, even if it was limiting, even if it was causing quiet suffering, provided a sense of order. When it starts to come apart, the mind often concludes, something has gone terribly wrong. But in many cases, something has gone terribly right. The old architecture has reached its natural limit. What is happening is not collapse. It is renovation. The problem is that modern culture is not built to support this kind of inner renovation. High-performance culture celebrates clarity, consistency, and visible progress. It has very little language for seasons of confusion, and even less tolerance for them. Not knowing is framed as irresponsibility. Doubt is treated as weakness. Changing direction is labeled as instability. Sitting in uncertainty is seen as avoidance. So the person going through a legitimate process of psychological growth is handed a cultural verdict. You are falling behind. You are losing. You are failing. And that verdict lands on top of an already tender interior, making the confusion twice as heavy. In the digital world of 2026, this weight increases further. Every day, screens deliver thousands of alternative lives, belief systems, identities, and possibilities. The mind is exposed to more complexity, more contradiction, and more nuance than the old internal map was ever designed to handle. Beliefs that once went unquestioned meet constant counterexamples. Identities that once felt solid sit next to hundreds of different ways of being alive. The friction that builds is not a personal failure. It is a structural response to a world that has outgrown the map that was carried into it. There is a particular space that opens in the middle of this process. It sits in the gap between the life that no longer fits and the life that has not yet taken shape. Between the identity that is dissolving and the identity that has not yet solidified. Between the certainties that have been lost and the new truths that have not yet arrived. This space is what can be called cognitive friction, the internal experience of holding two realities at once. The old one that no longer works, and the new one that cannot yet be seen clearly. In this gap, emotions can feel contradictory and overwhelming. There may be grief for a version of life or self that is ending, even if that version was never fully satisfying. There may be strange bursts of clarity followed by long stretches of numbness. There may be a persistent, low-grade anxiety with no obvious source, because the nervous system is registering the loss of structure even when the mind has not fully named it. There may also be a pull, strong and convincing, to run back to the familiar, to return to the old relationship, the old job, the old belief system, the old way of defining the self. Not because those things were good, but because at least they were known. This is one of the most critical moments in the entire process. The moment when the discomfort of the unknown makes the familiar feel like safety, even if the familiar was a form of slow suffering. Resisting that pull is not easy, but returning to a version of life that has already been outgrown does not usually bring peace. It brings a quieter, more resigned kind of suffering, the suffering of knowing exactly what was traded away and choosing it anyway. Sitting with the discomfort of not knowing, without immediately filling the space with old certainties or desperate new ones, is one of the most advanced psychological capacities a person can develop. It means holding "I don't know" without treating it as a verdict. It means trusting that clarity is not always available on demand, and that some directions only become visible after the previous compass has been put down. As this process continues, something begins to shift underneath the confusion. New information that arrived and seemed impossible to integrate starts to find its place in a different kind of order. Past experiences are reinterpreted with more compassion and complexity. Patterns that were invisible under the old map become obvious in a new one. Stories change their meaning. "I failed" begins to become "I outgrew that version of life." "I am broken" begins to soften into "I survived by carrying a map that no longer matches who I am." "Nothing makes sense" begins to evolve into "I am in the middle of rewriting what sense means to me." This is the integration of higher complexity, the internal architecture expanding to hold more nuance, more contradiction, more honesty than the previous version could. The person who is capable of this, who can hold paradox, who can sit with ambiguity, who can make decisions from inner alignment rather than inherited scripts, is not the same person who began this process. Something fundamental has shifted. Psychology recognizes this through the concept of post-traumatic growth. After periods of significant disruption and disorientation, many people report not just recovery, but genuine expansion. Stronger inner foundations, clearer values, more authentic relationships, a sense of self that is less borrowed and more chosen. The disruption is not what creates growth by itself, but the willingness to move through the disruption rather than around it often does. Feeling lost, in this context, frequently sits right at the beginning of that willingness. It is the moment when the old way of navigating life is no longer available, and the new way is not yet in hand. That moment is not failure. It is the threshold. There are ways to move through this threshold with more intention and less unnecessary suffering. Treat confusion as information, not as a verdict. When the internal experience says, "I don't know who I am anymore," that is not a final answer. It is data. The current self-concept is under renovation. Something is being dismantled to make room for something more accurate. Name what is actually ending. The disorientation often becomes less overwhelming when it is possible to identify what specifically is dissolving: a role, a belief, a relationship, a version of identity. Giving language to the loss does not stop the discomfort, but it makes it less formless. Create small anchors that do not depend on big answers. When the large structures of meaning are shifting, simple daily stability matters more than usual. Sleep, food, movement, honest conversations, moments of quiet. These are not solutions. They are the scaffolding that allows deeper reorganization to happen without full collapse. Be deliberate about the narratives consumed during this time. Content that constantly promises clarity, linear progress, and instant transformation can deepen the shame of sitting in necessary confusion. Stories that honor cycles, seasons, and the slow, unglamorous work of becoming offer a much more truthful and useful framework. And when the temptation to run back to the old map is strongest, pause. Ask, is this familiar thing actually safe, or does it just feel safe because it is known? The answer will not always be comfortable, but it will be honest. A life built on a more honest map is not always easier, but it is more real. And real, over time, tends to be far more sustainable than a performance of certainty that the internal world no longer believes in. The person who comes through this phase is almost always different from the one who entered it. They navigate differently, choose differently, and relate to uncertainty differently. From the outside, the story might be told simply, "That was the time everything fell apart." From the inside, the truer version is often, "That was the time I stopped living by a map that was too small and started building one that finally matched the reality of who I actually am." If this reflection speaks to something currently being lived, a season where the old definitions of self, direction, and meaning are dissolving without a clear replacement, this channel exists to hold exactly this kind of conversation. The ones that sit at the intersection of psychology, identity, and the honest complexity of becoming. Subscribing is one quiet way of choosing to keep this kind of perspective close, especially on the days when the mind is most tempted to call an upgrade a failure. Liking this video helps it find others who are quietly panicking about feeling directionless, when in truth their internal architecture is being rebuilt. Sharing it with someone who keeps saying, "I don't recognize myself anymore," might offer them a language that is kinder and more accurate than "I am falling apart." And in the comments, one honest act. Name one area of life where the old map no longer fits: a belief, a role, a relationship, an identity, without needing to have the new map ready. Sometimes the most important step is simply admitting, clearly and without shame, that the old way of navigating has run out of road.